How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to be painting Sera from Dragon Age Inquisition, and we'll take a really good look at skin turns and how I keep them sort of nice and fresh and lively, and a good sort of strategy for shadow turns. So grab your brushes and let's get into it. So we have our sketch and our canvas and our brushes all ready to go. I'm going to show you the palette layout. So I start with burnt umber at the top, burnt sienna, ultramarine, cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, and like plenty of white. And what we'll start with is just get a blob of everything apart from the burnt sienna and the white. And what you're looking for really is when you mix all these colours together is a nice warm roasted coffee brown colour. And that's going to be your base skin tone. So if it's too bright, then you can always knock it back with a little bit of blue. Or if it's too dark, you can always make it lighter with a little bit of yellow. But keeping the warmth is the main thing. So if it starts to look cold, like it looks like a grey colour, add a bit of cadmium red or a bit of alizarin crimson, and that should just warm it up. And then from there, when we have our base skin tone, what we'll do is we'll add white. And what we're looking for now is a dark shadow turn. So think of like a turn that's coming from the shadow into the mid. You want something between mid-turn and shadow. So adding white, we get this sort of like a rich olive colour. And then we'll add, taking from that, we'll add more white. And that should give us our mid-turn. It's like a nice creamy sort of colour that sits in the between everything. So it sits in between your shadow turns and it sits in between your highlights. And then for our highlight colour, or our sort of lightest skin tone, we'll just add a bunch more white. And that should give us a nice, highlight turn to work from. What we can always do is, if it's not light enough, we can always add white to it. And if it's not dark enough, you can always add blue to it. Just as long as you've got this nice range of colours. So you should have a shadow turn, something between mid-turn and shadow turn, so you can get that gradient of turn. Your mid-turn and your highlight turn. And then we're going to take a bit of our mid-turn and we're going to add some cadmium red to it. And this should give us like a nice blush colour. That's quite a nice turn to use for things like on the cheek or around the eyes. And then if we take that colour again and we add more red to it, that should give us a nice turn for the lips. So with the lips, essentially you just want skin tone with red in it. So they are just a sort of red version of skin. And now we've got our lip turn. What we'll do is we'll mix a sort of bluey turn. And that will be for places like under the eye, where you have these sort of grey neutral colours, especially in Caucasian skin. Not so much in sort of brown and black skin. It tends to lean way more towards blue. But in Caucasian skin, it's sort of grey, I guess. I'm guessing that's because the blue mixes with the sort of yellow tone of the skin, and they kind of cancel each other out. So now we have our mixes, we can get to painting. So we'll start with the eye, and we'll put in a dark line just along that upper lid. And then we can pull some of that down into the sclera when we come to paint that, the white of the eye. And if we just put that in, and then we mix the sclera into it as the sclera reaches that top lid, it gives it a nice overhang, like a natural shadow. Then we'll get in the dark red where the tear duct is. So we're blocking it in like a dark red, and this is just the lip tone mixed with the shadow tone. And that should help give it a little bit of depth. It will sink it into the face. And then we can always pull out a nice highlight for that sort of moistness of the tear duct. When it comes to painting the iris, if you use your coloured circle, think of it like a coloured circle, where the dark line is that goes around the circle's edges, blend some of that into the sclera, and it makes it less harsh and makes it look a bit more natural. And that should help to make it look less stark when it's up against the sclera. I'm going to drop a nice crisp highlight into the just the top corner of the pupil. And where the highlight comes in, that catch light on the top of the pupil, the opposite side of that, so if you think of it like a diagonal, that's where we'll put down a nice subtle highlight. It's not too bright, we don't want it too bright because it makes the eyes look like they're glowing, but we want a nice light so that it looks like the light is shining through the iris and then catching on that bottom rim. Now we can start working out from the eye. So this is how I paint all my portraits. I get the eyes in, both of the eyes, so we started on that one and we'll work on the next one, and then I kind of join all the facial features together. So we'll start on the nose next. We're going to get a nice shadow in where the eyelid, that curve of the eye, that circle, that ball, meets the upper brow. hopefully give it a bit of depth. It makes it look like it's sort of creased. That's what we want. We want a nice crease of skin there. And that is just using the shadow tone, the darkest shadow tone, and we'll blend that into some mid-tone and then into some lighter tone and then ultimately into a nice bold highlight where the light catches just underneath that brow. When it comes to painting the nose, it's kind of like you're sculpting this, really. So think of it like 3 or 4 planes. So you have the bridge, that's one plane. You have the sort of ball at the end. And you have 2 sort of flanges that go either side of it. You won't see the flange on this one because it's covered because she has a head sort of 3/4. But if you were painting someone dead on, you'd have 2 flanges that just sit below where the eyes are. And then you have the bottom bit where the nostrils are. And you want the bridge to step forward and you want everything else to kind of curve backwards. Good tip for the bridge is when you get it in and you've got the nice shadows underneath where the nostrils are and everything, is to have a nice highlight that just runs along the edge. It doesn't have to be pure white, but just a really nice sort of light skin tone. And that just sort of pulls it out and pushes everything back. And you'll sometimes see, if you look at reference images and things when you use them when you paint, which you should always do, by the way, you'll sort of see that if they're sort of lit relatively well, they'll have a nice highlight that runs along that bridge there. And there's always a nice, really nice sort of stark highlight on the tip of the nose. And when you get them in, it kind of brings everything forward and it helps it look a lot more realistic. So I've painted in the flesh around the mouth, and that's so when we come to paint our lips, we can blend them into that skin. So a good rule of thumb to follow when painting portraits is to try and avoid hard edges unless they're absolutely necessary. So on that edge of the face where the face meets the background, or that bit of hair, we want a pretty hard edge there because we want it to come forward from the background. But in terms of sort of the facial features, if we keep these edges nice and soft, it looks like they sort of blend into each other. And then the whole thing just has a nice sense of realism around it, because there are no hard edges really in real life. There's just sort of the difference between tone and colour. So by blending these edges, we get a nice sort of natural look to the facial features. So now that's in, we can start working on the bottom of the face. I want a quite stark highlight on the chin, because the light's coming in from that direction. As you can tell, we've got the face curving round into the shadow. So if you have a nice stark highlight on the chin, a nice dark shadow underneath that bottom lip where it overhangs, and then we can bring it round. And for the jawline, what I'm looking to do is I want a dark line that runs all the way along that jawline, and then we're going to blend the jaw and the neck together, because we don't want a hard line, because it kind of makes it look like it's not part of the body. So if we just blend those together, we should be able to bring it so it's a nice gradient of colour. Then we can get the ear in. So I've never painted elf ears before, so this was a completely new thing to me. So I've just elongated a human ear, and I think that kind of looks okay. It kind of looks like an elf ear. I looked at some references of Sera's ear, and yeah, it's kind of just like an elongated human ear. We'll put her neckerchief in, and we'll just keep that nice and loose. It doesn't need to be, it's right at the bottom of the canvas. That's not where the eye is going to be drawn. So we'll just keep it nice and loose. It doesn't need to be major. Block it in with sort of a nice blue colour. When it comes to painting the background, I'm painting the background in around the portrait now. And that's for one reason and one reason only. That's so we can, when it comes to painting the hair, we can mix some of the hair into the background colour. So essentially she doesn't look like a cardboard cutout on top of a background. It doesn't always work. You'll have to bear with me on this one. But actually what we want is, we want her to, the hair as it curves around the skull to blend into that background colour. When painting hair, a good rule of thumb is dark to light. And always, always follow the direction of the hair, the way it grows from the scalp. So we're going to follow the direction of the hair. We're just going to block the whole thing in a nice mid-tone. And this is just yellow ochre and a touch of burnt sienna. That's what the burnt sienna is for. And that burnt sienna darkens it down a little bit. And then we'll slowly just build the hair up layer by layer. It takes a while, and you just slowly build it up. You add in the darks, you add in the lights. If it's not dark enough somewhere, go darker. If it's not light enough somewhere, go lighter. We'll add some nice highlights where the hair catches the light. What I would recommend is not getting bogged down in painting every single hair, because you'll be there forever. So rather than painting every single hair, just think of hair as like shapes. You want to paint shapes. Slowly bring those shapes to life by mixing them, the darks and the mids and things. When it comes to painting singular hairs, it can help to have like a really thin brush like this. This is a rigger brush, and it should help to get nice smooth lines. If you loosen down your paint a little bit, either with the linseed oil or I use gambling paint medium. Loosen that paint up so it's almost like, say, like a syrupy consistency. And what you want to do is you want to grab your paint, make sure the rigger brush has really got plenty of paint on it, and that'll allow you to do one smooth, long brush stroke, because the paint will run nicely off it because it's nice and loose. And then we'll just add in some singular strands of hair. We can always add darker ones or lighter ones, it doesn't really matter, but the tip is to try and make them follow the same direction as the hair that they're coming from. And then we can get fancy with it towards the end and some swells and things. And now the whole portrait's in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that shadow tone from the background. So this background tone is just burnt umber and ultramarine. And we're going to add a touch of burnt sienna to it. And we're going to introduce that warm colour to the shadows on the portrait. And that should marry everything together. And that's the finished piece. Sera from Dragon Age Inquisition. Probably one of my absolute all-time favourite video game companions. Just because she's hilarious. She was never out of my party in that game. Her and Blackwall were an absolute comedic duo to be reckoned with. I hope you enjoyed painting Sera with me, and if you've learned a tip or two, give this video a thumbs up, or ring the bell and subscribe and all that YouTube stuff. Until next time, farewell.